A quick sponsor disclosure before we get started. This presentation is for educational purposes only. TriNet provides legally compliant HR guidance and best practices. TriNet does not provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. The materials in this presentation and products, advice, and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those prepared by the presenter and not necessarily those of TriNet. TriNet does not guarantee the accuracy or reliability of the information provided. TriNet does not endorse the materials provided. Attendees should note that this session is being recorded. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We wanted to say thank you to TriNet, our sponsor for this webinar. TriNet understands that nonprofit organizations come together to do what's best for each other and our world. You provide access to shelter, food, education, health, wellness, and elder care, among other initiatives, and to many, peace of mind to those whose lives have been disrupted by job loss. Nonprofits are often our front line, responding to the community needs. Thank you for all you do. Many of you may have already heard of TriNet and our customers, but for those of you who are not, TriNet is a professional employer organization that provides small and medium-sized businesses with a full-service HR solutions tailored by industry. What that means is the core solution resonates with the industry. The emphasis of the value prop might change based on the industry you are in. Their nonprofit HR solution scales with your organization by consolidating the strength of thousands of small and medium-sized businesses to deliver access to enterprise-level benefits, digital integration, and full-service HR technology, payroll, access to benefits, risk mitigation and management, and access to human capital expertise. They believe nonprofits need to have this complete solution to really thrive in today's environment. The pandemic brings to light the need for a strong HR function to build a sustainable infrastructure to support your mission. Nonprofit leaders are looking for ways to protect their team's health, improve morale, and enable productivity. TriNet is prepared to help nonprofits utilize technology to improve operational efficiencies, reduce costs, increase benefits, remain compliant, and enhance your employee experiences. We invite you to reach out to Linda Santino-Cito, National Vice President at TriNet, with any questions you may have.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Community Foundations as a COVID-19 Resource, How to Leverage Donor-Advised Funds. For those of you who are returning Candid webinar participants, a very warm welcome back. And to those of you with us for the first time, I'm very glad you've decided to join us today. My name is David Rosado, and I'm the Director of CF Insights at Candid, based in New York City. I am joined today by my colleagues Elizabeth Zavada, Chris Bunting, and David Holmes. They will be supporting the webinar behind the scenes and responding to questions submitted in the chat. I would also like to thank TriNet for supporting today's webinar. For those of you joining us for the first time, a quick few words about Candid. Candid is a new nonprofit organization formed from Guidestar and Foundation Center coming together last year. Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. We believe that an effective social sector is critical for a thriving society, and we believe in the importance of solutions for the sector by the sector. Through research, collaboration, and training, Candid connects people who want to change the world with the resources they need to do it. You can learn what it took to become Candid in our first Candid annual report. Our team will be sharing the link with you today in the chat box. We also wanted to take a moment to say thank you for taking time out of your day to be part of our learning community. Given the current situation, we are providing more online programming to continue to serve you. We recognize that nonprofits are facing challenging times, and as a nonprofit ourselves, we at Candid feel it too. Therefore, we are redoubling our efforts to share resources and information that will help us get through this crisis together. This webinar is one of many programs that have resulted from our efforts at Candid to better serve you. I am beyond pleased to introduce my co-panelists for today. Sarah Harrison, the Vice President of Philanthropic Services with the Denver Foundation, and Ruben Arduña, the Chief of Philanthropy with the San Francisco Foundation. Both Sarah and Ruben work closely with their community foundations' respective donors to maximize the reach and impact of those donors' philanthropic dollars, including through the management of donor-advised funds, which we're going to talk all about today. We will spend most of our time together hearing directly from Sarah and Ruben as they discuss the important role donor-advised funds play in the field generally, and as a critical tool in responding to crisis, including this one in particular. They will also discuss how organizations seeking support can access those funds. Before we dive into today's content, we wanted to do a quick poll to get a sense of who is joining us today. You should see the blue polling screen on your end, and our question is simply, what is your role within your organization? We'll give everyone a moment to make their selections, and if none of the ones on the screen apply to you, you can just let us know in the chat as well. I will toss it over to Elizabeth to let us know how many of our attendees have submitted responses. Elizabeth?
Thank you, David. We will give everyone just a moment or so here to make their selection. And as David said, if none of the ones on the screen apply, do let us know in the chat why you're joining us today. We definitely want to know who's in the room. It looks like I have about 40% of the room participating in our poll thus far. So I'll give everyone another moment or so we can capture their responses. All right, and with 3/4 of the room participating, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results with the room. And I don't think it's much of a surprise that 62% of the room here is reporting that they are involved in development or fundraising of some sort, but we also have about 24% of the room representing a leadership or executive position within their organization. I, as someone who works within programs and always glad to see that representation in the room as well. And of course, we always welcome anyone who's in admin or operations. I think having your point of view is always helpful. Any thoughts here on our audience here, David?
No, I just think that it's super helpful to know what the makeup of our audience is, and I think that these are going to be really helpful to help Sarah and Ruben, of course, tailor their comments specifically during today's conversation. But thank you everyone for participating in the poll and for joining us today. And we will have a lot to share with you during this hour, which is going to fly by, I think. So again, thank you for sharing your poll responses with us. So before we kick it over to Sarah and Ruben, I want to begin to set the table by setting the table a little bit for everyone and answer a very basic question, and that is just what are donor-advised funds? So put simply, they are charitable funds that are established by a donor and managed by a sponsoring organization like a community foundation. You might even think of a donor-advised fund as a sort of charitable investment account. In the case of donor-advised funds, the sponsoring organization, like a community foundation, has full legal control over the funds, and any distributions to the fund are irrevocable. But the donor that established that fund has the privilege of advising that organization as to how to distribute the funds and has the reasonable expectation that the advice is going to be followed. It is also not at all uncommon for the donors themselves to seek advice from the community foundation as to how to direct funds, which we'll say a lot more about soon, and I know that Ruben and Sarah are going to say a lot more about that specifically. Donor-advised funds have actually been around for close to a century. It was the New York Community Trust, a community foundation based in New York City, that lays claim to the establishment of the first donor-advised fund, or DAF, as you may hear in shorthand throughout this presentation, in 1931. But despite that long history, donor-advised funds, which provide an immediate tax benefit for donors who can then decide how best to distribute dollars from the fund over time, have exploded in popularity over the past 30 or so years. And it wasn't until even more recently that a legal definition of donor-advised fund was established as part of the Pension Protection Act of 2006. According to the latest data from the National Philanthropic Trust, which puts out an annual sector-wide analysis of donor-advised funds held in community foundations, single-issue charities, and national DAFs like Schwab Charitable and Fidelity Charitable, contributions to these funds as a percentage of total individual giving has increased every year since 2010, when it was 4.4% to 12.7% in 2018. The total number of individual donor-advised fund accounts has also increased each of the last several years, up from roughly 241,000 accounts in 2014 to over 728,000 accounts in 2018. Although there are no payout requirements associated with them, donor-advised funds are highly active grant-making vehicles. So according to the latest data that we've compiled, through CF Insights, donor-advised funds from a sample of about 251 community foundations gave $5.4 billion in grants in 2018. Payout rates, calculated as the percentage of assets that are granted in a given year, tend to be higher for donor-advised funds than for other fund types, and far higher than the 5% requirement that is associated with private foundations. According to CF Insights data, the median payout rate for DAFs hosted by community foundations was 10.6%, while the median payout rate for all community foundation funds, which would include their discretionary grant making, scholarships, and others, was 6.1%. For every dollar put into a DAF hosted by one of the community foundations in our most recent sample, close to 91 cents went out as a grant to support an organization in the community. Now, this last data point is referred to as the flow rate of donor-advised funds. And I bring that up because this compares grant-making totals for a given year with the total put into the funds that same year. A recent study by two independent researchers named Dan Heist and Danielle Vance McMullen used IRS data over a 10-year period to demonstrate that donor-advised fund flow rates tend to be resilient during economic recessions, which is why I bring that stat up here. And that reflects their ability to act as rainy day funds during downturns and potentially other crises like the current COVID crisis and an associated recession. Already, we are seeing examples of grant making from donor-advised funds ramping up considerably in response to the pandemic. By early May, Fidelity Charitable reported that more than $230 million in grants have been recommended by DAF holders specifically in response to the coronavirus. Schwab Charitable reported a 21% increase in DAF-driven grant making this past February and March over the same period in 2019, and the National Philanthropic Trust reported a 39% increase in the number of DAF grants this past March over March 2019. Community foundations reported similar spikes in their DAF giving in response to the crisis via a recent survey conducted by the Community Foundation Public Awareness Initiative. The 64 community foundations that took that survey reported over $800 million in grant making from their donor-advised funds in March and April, a nearly 60% increase over the same period last year. By their very nature, community foundations are uniquely equipped to be among the most responsive to crises affecting the local communities in which they are embedded. As grant-making organizations that typically serve broad constituencies within a defined geographic area and led by individuals who live within that area, community foundations are often seen as leading philanthropic entities with a firm grasp on the needs and strengths of the local community. As stewards for donor-advised fund holders looking to create maximum impact in support of their communities, the close to 1,000 community foundations across the country have the unique ability to work with their donors to ensure that support is going where it's needed most. Community foundations, like other grant-making organizations, will support urgent relief efforts during a crisis. But community foundations as local institutions that are set up to remain in place in perpetuity also play a critical role in long-term recovery efforts after a crisis. It's through this deep connection to community that folks like Ruben, Sarah, their teams, and others who work with donor-advised fund holders at community foundations are able to help maximize their ability to create positive local impact. And with that, I want to once again welcome Sarah and Ruben. Thank you so much again for participating in today's webinar. And I started by giving a little bit of background about donor-advised funds on a very, very basic level, but I'd like to know more about the administration of your community foundation's donor-advised funds specifically. So I'll start with this question. How do you work with your DAF holders to contribute to your community foundation's ability to create positive impact? And how have they mobilized during crises just like this one? So I will start with Sarah and the Denver Foundation. Sarah?
Thank you, David, and thanks to everybody. It's great to be with you here virtually today. And I love the statistic that there are 62% of the audience are my fellow fundraisers. I've spent my entire career as a fundraiser and donor service person, including my last bit of time here at the Denver Foundation. So you're my people. It's great to be together. So let's talk about the first question, which is how do donor-advised funds create positive impact in our community, and what does that look like in COVID? So I would say there are two ways that our funds have created positive impact. You're looking at the slide that shows about 45% of our assets are in donor-advised funds, and the other 55% are in other kinds of funds, including our Fund for Denver, Permanent Discretionary Endowment, scholarship funds, designated funds, and so forth. So let's go to the next slide. Just by the numbers. So let's pause here for just a second. There are two ways I want to emphasize that we've had positive impact. The first is just the great generosity. I think you can see here that our distribution rate is 16% cumulatively of our donor advised fund holders. That looks like over 56 million a year for the last 3 years. And we hold pretty steady at just a little over 16%. As David mentioned, this is triple what a private foundation is required to give. And our donors are very, very active, as you can see. The second area where we feel like there's great positive impact for our community is that we're seeking not just to be a transactional entity, but we want to work with our donors as individuals and as community members. So we work to enhance that connection to the community so that we have engaged, involved, and informed strategic philanthropists. So how do we do that? We hold education sessions. We have issue briefings throughout the year where we feature an issue that's important in society and philanthropy in our local community. And then we offer ways to engage. And those ways to engage always encourage people to give of all their 4 T's: time, talent, treasure, and testimony. So we hope that our fund holders will do more than just give, that they'll actually look up, lean in, and listen to how they can make a difference in the community. So that might mean volunteering their special skills. It might mean serving on boards, and it also, in a lot of cases, can mean using their voice to support legislative action that helps the nonprofit community and the people that we're serving. So other ways we help people engage with the community is we hold family sessions where people can develop their strategy. Same for our corporate fund holders. We organize site visits and host affinity groups for like-minded people to give together. And of course, we conduct custom research when asked. So let's go to the next slide. This is about COVID. So our donors, already very active, have really kicked it up during the first 4 or 5 months of this year. Here's a comparison. In 2018, a kind of a typical year, 5.8 million in donor advised grants went out. Last year, 8.7 million. And this year, between March 13th and April 30th, 90% increase to 16.7 million in grants going out. Let's go to the next slide. There have been a couple of ways that the donors have engaged. First, they dug into their own nonprofits and absolutely distributed a lot more money to the things they cared about. They also helped the statewide fund that was established by our governor. It is housed at Mile High United Way. And together with our donors, we have given just over $1 million. And 50,000 came from the foundation's discretionary fund. The rest is from fund holders. And then next slide. More numbers on giving. One of the things you see here is through May 31st, we're at 24.3 million in grants from donor advised funds going out. This is clearly an increase for COVID response. 2 million of that came to our own critical needs fund, which is our donor funded quick action account where we activate the fund in different crises. We seek support, and then we do rapid deployment of those dollars in the local community for relief. And we've done it for hunger, we've done it for housing, and again, now this was for COVID. So, next slide. That's it.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Sarah. That was great. And Ruben, I'll go ahead and kick it right over to you and ask the same question about the San Francisco Foundation.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear?
Yes, can you hear me?
I could, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, my name is Ruben Orduña. I'm the Chief of Philanthropy at the San Francisco Foundation, have been there now for about 8 years. Before that, I was at the Boston Foundation for about 13, 14 years, and then I've been in other various community foundations for 8 or 9 years before that. So I've been in the field a pretty long time. It's nice to be here. It's great we're getting to talk about donor advised funds. As you know, a lot has been written about that giving vehicle. A lot of it true, I must say. But we're all recognize that these are really important vehicles that do help to stimulate and a lot of philanthropy in the area. And we see the San Francisco Foundation, or at least a relationship with our donors, is that we want donors who come to us to think about the region first. This is where they live, this is where they grew up, this is where they're raising their children. And we want our donors to be better residents and citizens, which means we want to be able to share as much information as we can about what is happening in the Bay Area, so that they are more thoughtful and better philanthropists. And that just gives us an opportunity to try to encourage and influence where some of their grant making is going. Let me first start, before I answer the question specifically, let me also go through, Sarah, a couple slides of numbers so you can get a picture of what the foundation looks like. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So we have our total asset base is about 1.5 billion in size. We were established in 1948, so we're one of the older community foundations. And you see the donor advised fund is about 37% asset-wise. The rest, the 63%, when you peel that further, of that amount, about 800 million of that 996 million is endowed. And of that amount, of the 800, about 400 million is discretionary to the foundation. In other words, the foundation can use those dollars to address the most pressing needs that it sees fit. So it gives the San Francisco Foundation an ability to create agendas, to influence policy, to establish partnerships, because again, those dollars are discretionary. And it's important because we're in the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, one of the unique features of it is the fact that they're within a 30-mile radius. They're actually even less than that. There's 4 large community foundations. When you combine their total assets, it's anywhere between 16 to 17 billion dollars. The San Francisco and the Marin Foundation have the largest endowments, but Marin's foundation that endowment tends to be focused on Marin. So the San Francisco Foundation has the most discretion in terms of how to use those dollars. So next slide, please. So we have there. You see there again. It's a large portion of the assets. It's a large portion of the individual funds. I think we have in total funds somewhere like 950 altogether. They're very active in terms of gifts into the fund. That's just the general average of where we tend. In fact, this year alone is our second best year ever. We're probably going to end up somewhere close to $220 million in contributions. Now, the foundation, a large chunk of that is going to donor advised funds, but we ourselves have our own initiatives, our own programs that we also raise money for. So it's that number is all inclusive. Grant making, as you can see, is also extremely active. The foundation's endowment, the discretionary one I talked to you about, that puts out somewhere like $30 million or so. the donor advised fund clearly is significantly larger. Somewhere between 60-65% of those grant dollars are staying in the Bay Area. You can see the annual distribution rate, again, a very active. And then that March to May activity, it really started when the city of San Francisco decided to close the schools. And it was an immediate, everyone went to work remote, and it was just a flood of inquiries and activity from our donors. And in that time period, compared to the year before, we saw an 84% increase in grant dollars. In the number of grants, and 155% increase in the grant dollars in that time frame. And that is still happening. However, there's a major pivot going on from COVID to a lot of the social unrest that you see now. A lot of police reform monies is heading in that direction. But staying with COVID, so our donors in that same time frame made grants from their funds to the tune of about $32 million to COVID-related activities. Now, the foundation immediately launched our own emergency COVID response fund, and what we did first, though, is we quickly reached out to our partner foundations and community foundations to see what they were doing. And what we discovered is that there wasn't anyone that was focused on the grassroots organizations, and which were the hardest hit and the fastest hit by COVID-19. So we decided as an institution to focus our own emergency relief fund to those types of organizations. And in particular, those types of organizations that were being run by people of color. So we purposely went down a certain path, knowing that no one else was filling that. So from that, we raised something like $3 million from our own donor advised funds there. We also partnered with the city of San Francisco on its Give to SF COVID response, and that fund raised something like $25 million from a variety of sources. And then we had other projects that pivoted to COVID-19 response that we were able to raise some more money for. But in answer to the question specifically, is so how, again, around 4 years ago, the foundation decided to set off on its new direction, which was about building a more equitable Bay Area. And one of the first things that our new CEO kind of recognized is the amount of money that was going out through donor advised funds. So we made a major commitment to increase the amount of what we called alignment between the donor advised fund grants and the foundation's grants. It didn't mean you had to give exactly to the same organizations, but to be giving with an equity lens, for example, was a critical piece. And so we've been on this 4-year journey of how to build that, that effort. And this year alone, I think we're probably going to be close to $50 million of those donor advised fund grants I showed you earlier about are going to organizations that are very much aligned with the foundation's what we call the North Star, the equity agenda. So when COVID hit, we went into the same mode, right? We reached out to our donors in a variety of ways to present to them options of what they could do around emergency relief in particular. We also responded to hundreds and hundreds of inquiries, not just from our own donors, but from other funders, companies, just looking for ways that they could participate. I mean, one of the more interesting conversations I had was with the Restaurant Association in San Francisco, and trying to find ways that that we could establish a fund or help them establish a fund to be able to support restaurant workers. And so we ended up referring them to another organization who was better suited, but we played the matchmaker and trying to make that work. And then we also partnered with other funders, other donors, other entities like the city of San Francisco. So it was not just encouraging our donors, but kind of being the go-between to helping you make introductions and connections to to COVID response, but also looking to partner with other places. And that was all right now is emergency relief. The foundation has begun to move now in a different direction, more around an equitable recovery, and that has even become more significant given what has been happening over the last 2 weeks. So, we're very much right now in conversation with a lot of donors around that effort as well. So, why don't I stop there, David?
Thanks, Ruben. Thanks so much. And yeah, it's clear from both of your answers, Sarah and Ruben, that, and from what I've seen, in the data and the reporting that's come out over the last few months, that DAF holders are stepping up considerably in response to the COVID crisis. And it sounds like, even now with more recent events, in response to more recent events, through the remarkably increased mobilization of their funds, which is very, very encouraging to see. But in the interest of time, I do want to move on to our next question and give you both a chance to respond to this. And I'll say that, community foundations, they report on aggregate DAF activity, a donor advised fund activity each year, but there are no real stringent reporting requirements that necessarily apply to individual donor advised funds. So because of this, information about the individuals behind DAFs might be obscured to some in some cases. So given that, what are some ways that nonprofits can get a leg up on receiving support from DAFs? Sarah, I'll start with you.
As a fundraiser, instead of thinking, how do I get in front of donor advised fund holders? I think, how do I expand the audience of people interested in my work or mission? And I find that the best connections are personal connections. So your board, volunteers, and other donors can help you with that. I often share Kim Klein's House Parties chapter from her great book on grassroots fundraising. But how do we help at the Denver Foundation? So we do a handful of things. Whenever we open a fund, we interview our donors and we ask them what they're interested in. And we also then watch what they're interested in by studying the grants that they make. So we have some information in that way. We urge them to ask questions and to lean into what we're doing, as well as ask more questions about the areas that interest them. We also do offer a platform called Floodlight, which is our online storytelling platform that's used both by donors and by nonprofits. Donors will post stories about why I give to a certain organization, why I focus in a certain field of work, and so forth. Nonprofits have the opportunity to tell their story of impact, how you're working in the community, what is helping, and so forth. And we know this is a regular publication, online sharing of ours. We share it on all of our channels, and we know it's popular with donors because they contact us about being able to share the story of their favorite nonprofits. So that's something that we offer. There is a submission process just because we have to oversee what goes into our site, but it's robust and helpful. And again, we do custom research as requested, and then issue briefings where we can feature issues and nonprofits doing work. Now, the types of inquiries we get really are very specific. People, I've never had anyone say to me, I have no idea what to do, please give me some suggestions. Mostly people know what they're concerned about and they want more information about that. So here are some of the questions we've had recently where we've been able to provide custom research and do some matchmaking. How do I help the protesters? Who helps people returning from incarceration? What are the arts programs doing for lost funding during COVID? How are you helping people with disabilities, especially developmental disabilities and neurological disorders, with healthcare during this period? So those are some of the things that those are actual questions that we got, where we provided research and did some matchmaking and helped people to lean in both to COVID and, of course, to the racial justice issues. Like the San Francisco Foundation, the Denver Foundation is committed to racial equity and especially to reimagining philanthropy with an equity lens. We've been on this journey for probably about 15 years, and it's evolved over that time from diversity and inclusiveness to actual equity. And a focus of our community grants program, grant making, is on nonprofits led by and serving communities of color. So our COVID response has been based on that, and our recommendations to donors includes that lens, and our pivot to include more information about how to help people in the racial justice issues that are happening now has included research based on that.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah,
Ruben, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah. I mean, we're almost identical to what to what Sarah just said, from different iterations, but very much kind of following that same direction. The one thing for us, though, that we do encourage organizations in the Bay Area, that those that feel their work is very much aligned with our equity agenda, we do want to hear from them. So we would encourage them to send us information about what they're doing, in particular around the issue of equity. We encourage them to go to our website to look at the programmatic side of the page, to get a better sense of what the foundation's work is about. And if indeed they feel that their work is in that space, we do encourage them to send us information. And then, like Sarah, I mean, we're constantly responding to inquiries, very same questions there. And it's good for us to know who's in that space, especially some of the newer organizations that are coming online. So very much like Sarah's approach, only I think for us, we do encourage them to reach out if indeed they feel they are in the same equity space that the foundation is.
Terrific. Thank you so much for this. And yeah, it's interesting to hear, just how deeply woven, the equity work of, both the San Francisco Foundation and the Denver Foundation is woven into crisis response as well. So it's not just like it's a discrete, separate program of the foundations, but that it's actually woven into everything that the foundation is actually doing. I do want to mention, there was a recent article. Before we pivot to the next question, there was a recent article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that highlighted one specific strategy by Oxfam America, who added a checkbox actually to their marketing materials and reply forms for donors to indicate whether a contribution was being made through a DAF, and a section for them to provide the name of their fund if they wanted to provide that. And for them, that simple act of increased record keeping allowed them to see whether donors might have been responding to the marketing materials that they received, and actually got to see a little bit about which donations were coming to them through donor-advised funds. And that same article actually lifts up the importance of stewarding DAF holders year-round. One thing, I mentioned this closer to the beginning of the program, but donors receive their tax benefit immediately upon the opening or making a contribution to their donor-advised fund. So they don't necessarily have the same incentive to make their donations at the end of the calendar year the way some other donors might. So those dollars are already in the fund, and they can be distributed at any time. So that article, it highlights the importance of making sure that you're looking to steward DAF holders year round. So with that, actually, I do want to focus on the donors themselves, those who have opened a DAF of their own, and I want to focus this discussion on the current crisis specifically, if I could. So what recommendations, Ruben, I'll start with you. What recommendations do you want to share with DAF holders to help maximize a community foundation's response to the COVID crisis?
Yeah, so again, I think leading up to this effort, we were on this strategy to increase the amount of alignment that donors are doing. That their grant making is doing. And, for us, we've become very intentional in terms of the way we are communicating to donors about our work and about the use of their funds in not just COVID, but also in the civil unrest that's happening now. So we're much more proactive in communicating, reaching out directly to donors that we know that have a history, for example. Like we have many donors that historically have given to voter mobilization, right? So we are actively going out to them to share work specifically around what the foundation is doing around a few of the state initiatives that are going to be on the ballot. For donors that have historically made grants around homelessness, for example, we're reaching out proactively and introducing them to some of the housing work that the foundation has been doing. We've also started to think of creative ways of how donors can use their donor-advised funds. We have two instances where donors agreed to use the entire balance of their funds for a housing loan, 0% housing loan to a fund here in San Francisco to help produce more affordable housing. That's separate from the program-related investment fund that we have, right? So we're talking to a donor now who knows that a lot of the homeless organizations in San Francisco have contracts with the city, and the city pays on a reimbursement basis. Well, right now, many of the nonprofits are suffering cash flow issues. So we're in deep discussion with this donor to potentially use a significant part of their donor-advised fund and convert it into a 0% loan fund for these direct service providers to tap into to deliver the service and then get reimbursed by the city, and those funds would go back to the donor-advised fund. So, we're trying to be as communicative as possible, intentional, but also creative in terms of how we can deploy those donor-advised funds in different ways.
Terrific. Sarah, same question to you.
You bet. So I think similar to Ruben, of course, we have been very communicative. We've had a couple of Zoom issue briefings, virtual issue briefings, where we have featured what's going on in the community, how we're responding, and how we can help our donors, and also how they're responding. Specifically in COVID, we did a few things. We said, please give, we're ready to go, give early. If you can join us with a gift to our Critical Needs Fund, we will be deploying those gifts rapidly to the most vulnerable, to organizations led by and serving people of color, and focusing on the areas of food and housing insecurity, access to basic medical care and mental health care, and safety from domestic violence. We also urged people to connect with their favorite organizations and support them in ways that they need now, because there are some changes that we're all seeing. And then also we urge people to connect with us and our grant making staff to see how we can make connections, or at least share best practice with them to help other things happen. And so an example of that, in the past, when we've activated the Critical Needs Fund for hunger specific work, we had a donor who's deeply connected to philanthropy through his faith. And he said, I really like the work I'm seeing in that backpack food program that you're supporting, and I would like to emulate that in the parochial schools. So we connected that donor and family to our community grants team, and they connected the donors to our Food Bank of the Rockies and Hunger Free Colorado and places that were doing this backpack program. And that program he's got going, it's in year 8 now in the parochial schools, feeding 1,000 students a month. So anytime we can share that expertise and play matchmaker, we do.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Ruben. Yeah, so, donor advised fund holders, they can only benefit from having more information about the work of the nonprofits that they might be looking to support, including which, issue area they support and the impact of the programs that they might be operating. So I do want to just pause really quickly here and mention the value of completing your nonprofit profile on Guidestar.org, a service of Candid. So your complete Guidestar nonprofit profile with a platinum seal of transparency is one of the best ways to ensure that donors on donor advised fund platforms, which include some of the largest platforms available like Fidelity and Vanguard and Schwab mentioned closer to the beginning of the program, allows donors to see a complete picture of your organization's work. So you might be wondering, how specifically does that work? And so first, let's clarify that many donors do their research online in a variety of ways. We've already heard from Ruben and Sarah about how they reach out directly to their community foundation to learn about organizations that may align with their philanthropic interests, but they may also use online tools like Google, Charity Navigator, and the nonprofit profile on Guidestar before they do their giving. But in addition, when a donor makes a recommendation from their account on one of those larger, online platforms, they also have direct access to information about nonprofits to support their decision making. And the dominant source of that information is the nonprofit profile on Guidestar. So, for example, if a donor is signed into their Fidelity charitable account online experience, they can research nonprofits and be directly looking at your organization's nonprofit profile and seal of transparency when they do so. So how can you make sure that your profile is giving them the full picture? You could see the high level differences between our seals of transparency right on screen here, from left to right, from bronze to platinum. And you can learn more about what's needed to achieve each seal on Guidestar.org. But the fullest view of your organization's impact will be possible if you contribute enough information via Guidestar directly to earn a platinum seal of transparency so that you can show the difference you're making with your work. So that's a quick sidebar that I wanted to bring up there. But Ruben, Sarah, this has been immensely helpful and illuminating, and I know I appreciate you sharing with us your insights today and your experiences. But I want to make sure we have a chance to address at least a few of the questions that we have received in our last 10 minutes together from our audience. And leading up to today's webinar, we received many questions, well over 120 questions is my last count. That was a few days ago, so I know we've received even more since then, and more continue to come in via the chat. We've reviewed these questions to look up the most common and relevant themes that we were able to uncover. And my colleagues are continuing to monitor the chat as well. And one of the most common questions that we got involved a direct connection, the potential direct connection between a nonprofit and the account holders themselves. And so I know that a lot of what your roles are, Ruben and Sarah, are lending your expertise and giving advice to DAF holders on what organizations to support. But some nonprofit leaders are looking for ways to potentially be connected directly with those account holders. So Sarah, I'll start with you. If there's a way for community foundations to help cultivate and steward direct relationships between nonprofit and account holders, is that something that you could speak a little bit to?
You bet. Thank you for that question. So again, we do two things. We take a cue from our donors and we say, what are you interested in and how can we connect you to that? And then we feature nonprofits broadly through our issue briefings, our publications, and our conversations and our online platforms. One of the things that we do is if someone asks, if a nonprofit says, I would really like to talk to so-and-so, who I see that her grant making is focused in this area, we reach out to the donor and say, there's an interest in meeting with you on behalf of this organization. Are you interested? And that gets mixed response. Sometimes people are absolutely open to it, and sometimes they're not. And so if they're not, then I take the message back that this time the donor is focused on other things, but I do the best I can to help. What we find is, as we're building trust and relationships with our donors, they start with the things they know best, and then over time, they look at what we're featuring in all of the ways we feature issues and organizations and ways to engage, and then they'll start to ask us questions and branch out. They may start with their favorite thing or their key issue, and then find that yes, they are interested in more and different and other. And whenever we can do that, we do.
Great, Ruben.
Yeah, very similar to Sarah. The one thing that, like, as I mentioned earlier, the foundation is totally focused right now on equity and kind of building a more equitable Bay Area. However, we are very open to approaches to equity that aren't the approach that the foundation might take, right? As an example, the arts, right? That it's not something that we do some of that through our discretionary grants, but not a lot of it. However, we've been approached by, in particular now, several organizations in the art space that are very much building programs to that address equity. And for those kinds of things, we definitely invite organizations to reach out to this would be the philanthropic kind of services team, to just give us some background and more information about the organizations. And then, as Sarah says, when the opportunities come up, right, and they do come up, we, in addition to just sharing the information, we encourage that if the donor expresses strong feelings for it or a strong interest, we oftentimes encourage either a site visit, a phone call, a meeting at the foundation or at the organization, so that the donor can get to kick the tires, if you will. But again, there's so many nonprofits coming at us, right? That for us, the initial lens has to be around equity before we can kick these kinds of relationships into the donors' world.
Very helpful. Thank you both. I want to move to our next question around nonprofits that may be not necessarily in the specific geographic area that your community foundation serves. So the question is, when I'm doing grant research, such as through Candid's foundation directory online to do prospecting research, I often see a wide range of community foundations that have given to organizations similar to ours, yet their websites say giving is only for their area. How worthwhile is it for us to contact them anyway and let them know of our work so that we are on their radar to suggest to their donors? Ruben, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So again, a big chunk of our grant making dollars, of DonorAdvised fund dollars, are stay in the Bay Area. Not all of it does, right? But we do, like I just got off the phone with a donor who really wants to start getting into voter mobilization, but he's already doing it locally and regionally and feels like he really now has to step up on a national level, right? So one of our program team is now looking at sort of the national landscape to be able to do that. So our expertise is local and regional, right? However, it is not unusual for donors to think on a national sense. I would say if you're a nonprofit that's national and you've received a grant, for example, from the San Francisco Foundation, from a DonorAdvised fund that is recognizable or that has the name, I would say you should be contacting us just to keep us up to speed on what's happening on that national scale, so that we can keep that donor informed, just as you would keep them informed as well.
Terrific. Sarah?
Yes. Same as Ruben, our discretionary grant making, which comes out of a pool of just under 200 million, is focused on the 7-county Metro Denver area. Our donors, however, can give to any U.S. public charity, and we figure about 20% of the time they give outside of Colorado. There's really a give where you live sort of thing, but of course we have donors who are from other places or went to school in other places and find those opportunities to share their grants. We do whatever we can, and again, featuring organizations on Floodlight, our platform, is one way to get introduced. It doesn't happen very often that we get these questions about introduce me to places out of state to give. So it's really more issue focused. And I should say, we tried a 5-year experiment of proactively suggesting and introducing grantees and donors, 5 years. So we had really good data on it. And what we found was that donors really enjoyed it because it was a little like book club. There was something interesting to read and interesting to learn. But the major activity that resulted from that was not more money going to those places that we featured. It was donors saying, oh, I have 2 or 3 organizations I'd like you to suggest out. And so there's a hunger to learn about things, but we feel that it just takes longer than that. It's really not just a suggestion. There is that personal introduction like we talked about later, and it has to be mission focused. So thank you.
Great, thank you both. So we're pretty close to that time. So I did want to ask one more question, if maybe we could answer it in just 1 minute. I'll just kick it over to Sarah. We received one question about, we received a meaningful gift from a DAF, but it was anonymous. Is it appropriate to thank the intermediary, which in this case would be the community foundation, or what would you say is the best practice if that's something that maybe you can answer in 1 minute? Sarah?
You bet. Absolutely thank the donor. You can send it to us. We have a cleverly named program called the Friday Mail that we send out every Friday to donors. That is personalized correspondence or reporting. And, you know, we don't, please don't send it to me. Don't say, dear Sarah, thank you for your gift. But you can say, dear anonymous fund or dear whatever fund, and provide the thank you and the update. And we pass those along, and people really do appreciate it. And they read it. And in fact, when people are doing their grant making at the end of the year, they'll comment whether or not they have received acknowledgement, and that helps with future giving.
Great, thank you so much.
Exactly the
sorry,
same
Ruben,
thing.
Go ahead.
Oh, the same thing.
Perfect,
Exactly
thank you
the same
both.
things with theirs.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. We are right at time. I wish we can keep going because this is such a great topic and super helpful tips for folks on the call to be able to take with them. But we do need to close. And before we close for today, we did want to share some additional learning opportunities with you. If you would like to learn more about how to approach a grant maker, we have a self-paced e-learning course called How to Cultivate Relationships with Funders. That's one of our most popular. And we also know that many organizations are looking to expand their connections with corporations. So on July 23rd, we will be discussing how to prospect companies whose funding priorities align with your mission, build corporate relationships, and design customized partnerships that meet the needs and interests of all parties. You can stay up to date with all of our trainings and resources through our newsletter. With that, I would like to say thank you so much both to Sarah and Ruben for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day to join our conversation. Before we sign off here, I want to just mention one more time that you will receive a link to view the recording of today's session in the follow-up email that will go out to you within the next 2 business days. And thank you again so much once more to TriNet for sponsoring today's webinar. And with that, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.